Before this night was over, a billionaire would discover that all his money could not buy back the one thing his daughter had been silently begging for. Stay with this story, because one small act of kindness will change 3 lives forever. And if it touches your heart, comment and subscribe so you never miss the next unforgettable story. The loneliest person in the room was not the waitress carrying empty glasses. It was not the billionaire standing beneath the cameras. It was the little girl everyone could see, and no one truly noticed. Crystal chandeliers scattered golden light across the grand ballroom of the Harbor Crown Hotel. Laughter floated through the air. Expensive watches flashed beneath tailored sleeves. Politicians, executives, investors, and celebrities moved from table to table, exchanging handshakes and stories that sounded important. Chloe Bennett balanced a silver serving tray against her hip and stepped carefully between clusters of guests. The heels she wore had been pinching her feet since the beginning of her shift 6 hours earlier, but she ignored the discomfort. Rent was due next week. Her electricity bill sat unopened on the kitchen counter, and every extra shift mattered. At 25, Chloe had learned that life rarely paused long enough for anyone to complain. She adjusted a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear and offered a polite smile as she approached a group gathered near the stage. One man accepted a glass of sparkling water without looking at her face. Another reached for a canopy while continuing his conversation. A woman in a designer gown accidentally brushed Chloe's arm and frowned as though the waitress had somehow appeared out of nowhere. Chloe apologized anyway. She always did. People noticed mistakes. They rarely noticed kindness. And almost no one noticed loneliness unless it made noise. The ballroom buzzed with anticipation. Tonight's charity gala was the biggest event of the year. Every local news outlet was covering it. Every photographer wanted a picture of the evening's most famous guest. Ethan Callaway, founder and CEO of Callaway Technologies. Billionaire, investor, philanthropist, one of the most influential business leaders in the country. His arrival had become the unofficial countdown everyone was waiting for. Chloe carried a tray of drinks toward the rear of the ballroom and finally allowed herself a quiet breath. The noise softened slightly near the wall. That's when she noticed her. A girl stood alone beside a marble column. Maybe 12 years old. Long blonde hair. Elegant navy dress. Small hands folded neatly in front of her. She looked perfectly composed. Perfectly trained. Perfectly invisible. Chloe slowed her pace. The guests nearby chatted and laughed. Servers moved around her. Photographers crossed the room. Yet no one stopped to speak to the child. No one even glanced in her direction. The girl watched the room carefully. Her eyes moved from face to face, mouth to mouth, conversation to conversation, like someone standing outside a bright window, watching a world that kept forgetting to open the door. Something about the expression tugged unexpectedly at Chloe's chest. It felt familiar, painfully familiar. A sharp voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me." Chloe turned immediately. A guest in an expensive suit held out an empty champagne flute. "This should have been replaced 10 minutes ago." Chloe offered an apologetic smile. "Of course, sir." The man handed over the glass with visible annoyance. "Service standards aren't what they used to be." Chloe nodded. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience." He walked away without another word. The criticism shouldn't have bothered her. She'd heard worse. But exhaustion had a way of making small things heavier. For a brief moment, she stared at the empty flute in her hand and wondered what it felt like to spend an evening being listened to instead of overlooked. Then she noticed the girl again, still standing alone, still watching everyone else belong. Chloe looked away first, because she understood that feeling too well. 15 minutes later, the atmosphere in the ballroom shifted. Heads turned toward the entrance. Conversations paused. Camera flashes erupted like sudden bursts of lightning. Ethan Callaway had arrived. Tall, confident, dark suit perfectly tailored. His presence seemed to pull attention toward him without effort. People gravitated toward him instantly. Investors approached with eager smiles. Reporters moved closer. Event organizers hurried forward. Within seconds, he was surrounded by admirers. Chloe watched from across the room as she refilled glasses at a nearby table. She had seen famous people before. Wealthy people too. But there was something almost unsettling about the way an entire crowd could orbit one person. Then her eyes drifted past Ethan, beyond the cameras, beyond the cluster of executives, to the little girl standing near the column. She hadn't moved. Not once. The distance between father and daughter could not have been more than 30 feet. Yet emotionally, it stretched like an ocean. The girl watched Ethan with an expression Chloe couldn't immediately identify. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It looked more like resignation. The kind that came from disappointment repeated too many times. Chloe swallowed hard. The feeling became even stronger. Familiar. She remembered hospital waiting rooms. She remembered sitting beside her younger brother Liam when they were children. Remembered how people spoke around him instead of to him. Remembered how often he smiled when someone finally took the time to communicate in his language. A language most people never bothered learning. Chloe's grip tightened around the tray. Across the ballroom, the little girl shifted slightly and looked toward the crowd once more. Her eyes lingered on moving lips. On conversations she couldn't hear. On laughter she couldn't share. Then she lowered her gaze. And for the first time all evening, Chloe saw something break through the girl's careful composure. Loneliness. Quiet. Deep. The kind that does not shout because it has already learned no one is listening. Chloe stood frozen for a moment. Around her, the gala sparkled brighter than ever. The billionaire was being celebrated. The cameras were flashing. The room was full of voices. Yet somehow the loudest thing Chloe could hear was the silence surrounding that child. And she had a feeling that before this night ended, that silence was about to change everything. Chloe forced herself to look away from the girl and return to work, but the image stayed with her as she moved between tables carrying trays of drinks and plates of carefully arranged meals. It was strange how one face could linger in a person's thoughts while hundreds of others disappeared into the background. Around her, the gala continued to glow with effortless luxury. Crystal glasses chimed together. Waiters crossed the ballroom with practiced precision. A string quartet played softly near the stage. Yet every time Chloe glanced toward the marble column, she found herself checking whether the girl was still there. And every time, she was alone. The sight stirred memories Chloe rarely allowed herself to revisit. 7 years earlier, life had looked very different. Back then, she had not been balancing trays at charity events or calculating which bills could wait another week. Back then, she had been 17, sitting beside her younger brother Liam at the kitchen table while sunlight spilled through the windows of their small home near the coast. Liam had been born profoundly deaf. Doctors explained it carefully. Teachers tried their best. Neighbors often meant well. But Chloe learned something important long before she became an adult. The hardest part of being deaf was not the silence. It was the loneliness other people accidentally built around you. She remembered family gatherings where relatives spoke around Liam rather than to him. She remembered cashiers smiling politely before turning away when communication required an extra moment of patience. She remembered how Liam would sit quietly watching conversations move across rooms like trains he could never quite board. Their mother worked 2 jobs, and their father spent weeks away driving freight across the country. Chloe became Liam's bridge to the world. At first, she learned simple signs from library books. Then she attended community classes. Later, she practiced every day until signing became as natural as speaking. Liam used to laugh whenever she made mistakes. He would shake his head dramatically and correct her with exaggerated expressions that made both of them laugh until tears filled their eyes. Those memories remained. Among the brightest of her childhood, a sudden voice pulled Chloe back to the present. Table 12 needs sparkling water. The event manager hurried past without slowing down. Chloe nodded immediately. Right away, she picked up a chilled bottle and crossed the ballroom. As she approached table 12, she noticed several guests discussing Ethan Calloway. His recent business expansion dominated the conversation. One guest admired his leadership. Another praised his charitable donations. A third described him as a visionary. Chloe quietly refilled glasses while they spoke. Not one of them mentioned his daughter standing alone across the room. When she finished, Chloe glanced toward the marble column again. The girl had shifted slightly, but remained isolated from the celebration surrounding her. For a brief second their eyes met. Chloe looked away instinctively. Then she stopped. Something about the girl's expression felt startlingly familiar. It was not sadness exactly. It was the careful look of someone accustomed to being overlooked. Chloe knew that expression because she had seen it countless times on Liam's face before someone included him in a conversation. A knot tightened inside her chest. Across the ballroom, applause suddenly erupted. Ethan had stepped onto the stage beside the event organizers. Cameras flashed rapidly. Guests turned their attention forward. The billionaire smiled politely as the host introduced him. Chloe watched everyone focus on the man beneath the spotlight. No one noticed the girl glance toward the stage and then quietly lower her eyes. The contrast felt impossible to ignore. The most celebrated man in the room stood beneath 100 lights. His daughter remained hidden in the shadows only meters away. Chloe carried another tray toward the kitchen entrance. As soon as she pushed through the service doors, the noise softened. Stainless steel benches lined the preparation area. Staff moved quickly between stations. For the first time all evening, she had a moment to breathe. She set down the tray and rubbed her aching hands. Her phone rested in her locker nearby. During her break earlier, she had looked through old photographs. One image remained open. Liam sitting on a beach near the coast, grinning into the wind while signing something impossible to understand from the still photograph alone. Liam had passed away 3 years earlier after a long illness. Some days the loss felt manageable. Other days it arrived unexpectedly. Like now, Chloe swallowed hard and blinked away the familiar sting behind her eyes. She missed his jokes. She missed his optimism. Most of all, she missed the way he could make strangers feel welcome within minutes. A fellow server approached carrying empty plates. "You all right?" Chloe offered a quick smile. "Just tired." The woman nodded knowingly. "Only a couple more hours." Chloe laughed softly. "We can survive that." Minutes later, she returned to the ballroom. The host continued introducing donors. Guests listened politely. Waiters circulated quietly. Nothing had changed. Except Chloe could no longer ignore the feeling growing inside her. The girl remained alone. The room remained crowded. And somewhere between memory and instinct, Chloe found herself thinking the same thought again and again. If Liam were standing here tonight, he would not leave that child by herself. Her eyes drifted toward the marble column once more. The girl sat now, hands folded neatly in her lap, watching the celebration unfold without her. Chloe slowed her pace, then stopped entirely. For the first time that evening, a decision began forming in her mind. Small, simple, perhaps even foolish. But sometimes the smallest acts carried the greatest weight. And before she realized it, Chloe was already turning toward the corner of the ballroom where the silent girl sat waiting unnoticed by everyone except her. Chloe's heart beat a little faster as she crossed the ballroom. She told herself she was only checking whether the girl needed anything. A glass of water, a snack, a simple act of courtesy. Yet deep down she knew it was more than that. Something invisible had been pulling her toward that lonely corner all evening. The closer she came, the more she noticed details others seemed to miss. The girl's posture was perfect, almost too perfect for someone her age. Her hands rested neatly. Together, her expression remained calm. But her eyes moved constantly, studying faces, watching mouths, collecting fragments of conversations she could never fully join. Chloe slowed her pace until she stood a few meters away. The girl noticed her immediately. Their eyes met again. For a brief moment, neither moved. Then Chloe offered the same warm smile she used whenever Liam had looked uncertain around strangers. The girl's expression softened slightly. It was a tiny change, almost invisible, but Chloe saw it. Most people would not have. Years of communicating through expressions had trained her to notice things others missed. Chloe approached with a tray balanced carefully in one hand. "Hi there," she said gently. The girl watched her lips. She did not respond. Chloe was not surprised. Instead, she crouched slightly so they were closer to eye level. Around them, the gala continued in a blur of voices and applause. Nobody seemed to notice the interaction beginning in the corner. "Would you like something to drink?" Chloe asked. Again, the girl looked at her mouth. Again, there was no reply. But there was no confusion either. Chloe recognized the pattern immediately. The same careful concentration Liam used whenever he relied on lip reading. A familiar ache stirred inside her chest. The girl glanced briefly toward the stage where Ethan continued speaking with guests and sponsors. Then she looked back at Chloe. Something in her expression seemed cautious, hopeful, unsure. Chloe understood that too. She remembered how often Liam hesitated before trusting someone new. Not because people were cruel. Most were not. They simply did not know how to bridge the gap. Chloe hesitated for only a second before making a decision. Slowly, she shifted the tray to one hand. Then she raised her free hand and signed a simple greeting. "Hello." The effect was immediate. The girl's eyes widened. Her entire body seemed to freeze. For a heartbeat, she simply stared. Chloe suddenly wondered if she had made a mistake. Perhaps the girl used a different communication system. Perhaps she had assumed too much. Then the girl's lips parted slightly in shock. Real shock. The kind that cannot be rehearsed. Chloe felt a small smile tug at the corners of her mouth. She signed again. Hello. My name is Chloe. The girl blinked twice. Her eyes darted from Chloe's hands to her face and back again. For the first time all evening, genuine emotion broke through the careful mask she had been wearing. Surprise, relief, excitement. They arrived one after another. Chloe had seen the same transformation years ago whenever Liam discovered someone who could communicate with him naturally. The memory nearly stole her breath. Slowly, almost cautiously, the girl lifted her own hands. Her movements were elegant and practiced. Hello, I am Olivia. Chloe's smile widened. Olivia. Beautiful name. Olivia stared at her for another moment before signing again. You know sign language? Chloe nodded. My younger brother taught me. Olivia's eyes brightened instantly. Really? Chloe laughed softly. Really? He was much better at it than I am. Olivia looked unconvinced. You seem pretty good. Chloe felt warmth spread through her chest. It had been months since she had signed with anyone. Longer than that since it felt this natural. Around them the ballroom remained oblivious. Guests continued discussing investments, business deals, and charitable initiatives. Photographers chased important people. Waiters carried trays through the crowd. Yet for Chloe, the noise seemed to fade into the background. Olivia signed another question. Does everyone here know sign language? Chloe followed her gaze across the ballroom. Then she looked back at the girl. No, I think it might just be me. Olivia glanced around the room again. A small shadow crossed her face. Chloe recognized that expression immediately. It was disappointment mixed with acceptance. The look of someone accustomed to isolation. Before Chloe could respond, Olivia signed something that made her heart ache. It gets lonely sometimes. Chloe swallowed. Memories of Liam flooded back instantly. School assemblies, birthday parties, family events. The same sentence expressed 100 different ways. She understood exactly what Olivia meant. Chloe signed carefully. I know. Olivia studied her face. Not many people do. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Chloe noticed something. The girl was no longer watching the crowd. No longer studying conversations from a distance. No longer standing outside the world looking in. She was engaged, present, connected. And for the first time all evening, there was a spark in her eyes that had not been there before. A spark that suggested this quiet conversation in the corner of the ballroom might become something far more important than either of them yet realized. For the next several minutes, time seemed to move differently inside that small corner of the ballroom. The speeches continued. Glasses clinked. Guests drifted between conversations. Yet none of it mattered to Chloe anymore. She found herself smiling more than she had in weeks as she and Olivia exchanged signs back and forth with growing ease. The girl's movements became faster with every question, as though years of stored-up thoughts were finally finding space to breathe. What began as a polite greeting quickly turned into genuine conversation. Olivia signed about her school, about her favorite books, about a rescue dog she desperately wanted but had never managed to convince her father to adopt. Chloe responded with stories about growing up near the coast, about working different jobs since finishing school, and about Liam. The moment she mentioned her brother, Olivia's expression softened. You miss him? She signed carefully. Chloe paused. Even after 3 years, the answer came with surprising weight. Every day? Olivia lowered her eyes briefly. Then she signed something so sincere that Chloe felt her throat tighten. He would be proud that you still sign. Chloe blinked. For a second she could not answer. The noise of the ballroom seemed distant again. She remembered Liam's grin, his stubborn optimism, the way he used to insist that kindness mattered more than talent. Slowly Chloe signed back. Thank you. Olivia offered a small smile. It was not a practiced smile for photographs. Not the polite expression wealthy children learned at formal events. It was real. Chloe realized she had not seen a genuine smile on the girl's face all evening. The discovery made her unexpectedly protective. A waiter passed, nearby carrying desserts. Chloe glanced at her tray and noticed several miniature chocolate tarts remained untouched. An idea crossed her mind. She lifted one carefully and held it toward Olivia. Secret question. Olivia tilted her head curiously. Chloe signed dramatically. Best dessert in the room? Olivia laughed silently and pointed at the tart. Obviously. Chloe widened her eyes in exaggerated agreement. Excellent answer. Olivia covered her mouth to hide another smile. The reaction encouraged Chloe. Years earlier, Liam had loved ridiculous debates over meaningless topics. Which biscuit deserved championship status? Whether penguins secretly judged humans. Whether seagulls attended meetings before stealing chips. The sillier the conversation became, the happier he was. Chloe decided to borrow one of his favorites. She signed thoughtfully. Important question. If a kangaroo wore shoes, would it need 2 shoes or 4? Olivia stared at her. Then her eyebrows lifted in disbelief. 2. Chloe immediately shook her head. 4. Definitely 4. Olivia laughed again and signed faster. No. 2. The front legs are basically hands. Chloe pretended to consider this. Then signed. Then why not 0? Olivia's eyes widened. Because then why buy shoes? Chloe pointed dramatically as though Olivia had trapped herself with logic. Exactly. The girl's shoulders began to shake. A silent laugh escaped before she could stop it. Chloe felt a surge of joy. The soundless laughter reminded her so much of Liam that for a moment it almost hurt. Yet it was a warm ache rather than a painful one. Nearby, several guests glanced toward them briefly before returning to their conversations. None of them understood what was being said. To everyone else, it probably looked like a waitress chatting with a child. Only Chloe knew how extraordinary the moment really was. Olivia leaned forward slightly and signed another question. Do you ever get tired of explaining sign language to people? Chloe laughed softly. Sometimes. Olivia nodded immediately. Me too. They shared a look of mutual understanding. Then Olivia signed something more slowly. Most people are nice. They just do not know what to do. Chloe recognized the wisdom behind the statement. It sounded older than 12. She nodded. That is true. Olivia glanced across the ballroom. Her eyes landed briefly on her father surrounded by sponsors and journalists. The brightness in her expression dimmed just slightly. Chloe followed her gaze. Ethan was smiling politely for photographs. People crowded around him from every direction. Yet he had not looked toward this corner once. Chloe felt a small twist inside her chest. She signed carefully. Do you come to many events like this? Olivia released a quiet breath. Too many. Chloe waited. Olivia hesitated before continuing. Everyone talks to Dad. Nobody talks to me. The sentence was simple. The pain behind it was not. Chloe remembered being a teenager and watching adults unintentionally exclude Liam from conversations. Not because they meant harm. Because they became distracted. Busy. Uncomfortable. The result was always the same. Loneliness. She wished she could fix that feeling for Olivia. Instead, she offered the only thing she could. Presence. Attention. Understanding. Sometimes that mattered more than solutions. Chloe signed gently. Well, tonight I am talking to you. Olivia stared at her for a moment. Then something remarkable happened. The guarded expression she had carried all evening finally disappeared. Completely. It was replaced by pure delight. The kind that transforms an entire face. The kind that makes a child look younger and brighter all at once. Before Chloe could react, Olivia signed a quick response. Good. Because I was starting to think everyone here had forgotten I existed. Chloe opened her mouth to answer. But the look on Olivia's face was so unexpectedly funny, so dramatic, and so perfectly delivered that she burst into laughter. A split second later, Olivia laughed too. This time she did not try to hide it. Her eyes sparkled. Her shoulders shook. And for the first time that evening, genuine happiness radiated from the girl standing in the corner of the room. The change was so sudden that even Chloe stopped laughing first. One moment Olivia had been sitting quietly in the shadows of the ballroom, careful not to draw attention to herself. The next, genuine happiness lit up her face with a brightness that seemed almost impossible. It transformed her completely. Chloe found herself smiling simply because the girl was smiling. For a few seconds, neither of them signed anything. They were too busy laughing at the absurd debate about kangaroos and shoes. The silence between them felt comfortable rather than awkward, familiar rather than empty. Chloe had forgotten how much she missed conversations that existed beyond spoken words. Olivia finally wiped at the corner of one eye and signed dramatically. You are definitely wrong. Kangaroos only need 2 shoes. Chloe placed a hand over her heart as though deeply wounded. I cannot believe you would say that. Olivia laughed again. The movement was larger this time. Freer. Unrestrained. A nearby guest glanced toward them. Then another. Chloe noticed, but paid little attention. She remained focused on Olivia. The girl had spent the entire evening invisible. If a few people looked their way now, perhaps that was not such a terrible thing. Olivia leaned closer and signed another question. Did Liam tell jokes like this too? Chloe smiled immediately. Constantly. Olivia waited. Chloe laughed softly at the memory. One time he convinced our neighbor that seagulls had secret meetings after midnight. Olivia's eyes widened. Did they believe him? For nearly a week, Olivia burst into another fit of laughter. This time she laughed so hard that she nearly dropped the dessert plate resting beside her chair. Chloe caught it just in time. The two of them exchanged amused looks. Around them, more heads were beginning to turn. A pair of women near the sponsor tables glanced over curiously. One of the photographers lowered his camera for a moment. Several guests looked surprised to see the usually reserved girl enjoying herself so openly. Olivia seemed unaware of the attention. Or perhaps she simply did not care. For the first time all evening, she looked completely relaxed. Chloe found herself wondering when the girl had last experienced a conversation without barriers. A conversation where she did not need to struggle to read lips or guess missing words. A conversation where someone met her exactly where she was. The answer made Chloe unexpectedly sad. Because judging by Olivia's reaction, it might have been a very long time. The music shifted as the string quartet began another piece. The gentle melody drifted through the ballroom like warm air. Chloe glanced toward the stage and noticed the formal presentations had ended. Guests were once again circulating through the room. Ethan remained surrounded by people. Investors, journalists, donors. Everyone seemed eager for a few moments of his attention. Chloe wondered whether he had any idea what was happening in the far corner of the ballroom. Olivia followed her gaze. Her smile faded slightly. Not completely, just enough for Chloe to notice. You love your father, Chloe signed gently. Olivia looked surprised by the question. Of course. Chloe nodded. I can tell. The girl hesitated before answering. Dad is a good person. Chloe sensed there was more. She waited patiently. Olivia looked down at her hands. He tries. The words carried a quiet sadness. Chloe understood immediately. Sometimes trying and connecting were not the same thing. Olivia signed again. He works all the time. Meetings, flights, interviews, calls. Chloe listened carefully. He always says he is doing it for me. Her hand slowed. But sometimes I wish he would just stay home and watch movies with me instead. Chloe felt a sharp ache in her chest. The honesty of the statement reminded her how young Olivia really was beneath the polished appearance and mature composure. She was still a child who wanted time with her father. Nothing more complicated than that. Chloe signed softly. Have you told him? Olivia gave a small shrug. Not exactly. Chloe understood. Some feelings were difficult to translate no matter what language someone used. Before she could respond, Olivia suddenly looked past her shoulder. Her eyes widened slightly. Chloe turned instinctively. Several people were watching them now. Not openly staring. Just observing. Curious. Confused. Interested. One older woman smiled warmly in their direction. A younger man appeared fascinated by the rapid movement of their hands. Even a few servers had slowed down enough to glance over. Olivia noticed the attention and looked uncertain. Chloe quickly signed. Do not worry. You have not broken any rules. Olivia laughed again. The tension disappeared immediately. Then something unexpected happened. A photographer standing nearby lifted his camera. He hesitated for a second before taking a single photograph. The flash was subtle, barely noticeable, yet it captured something special. Not wealth, not status, not influence. Simply a young girl laughing. A real laugh. Chloe noticed the photograph but thought little of it. Olivia was still smiling. That felt more important than any picture. Across the ballroom, conversations continued. The gala moved forward. Yet slowly, almost imperceptibly, a ripple of attention spread through the room. People noticed the change in Olivia. Some recognized her immediately as Ethan Calloway's daughter. Others simply sensed something unusual. Whatever the reason, more eyes drifted toward the corner where a waitress and a young girl sat communicating in a language most of the room did not understand. And among those shifting glances, one pair of eyes had finally begun looking in their direction. 30 meters away, Ethan Calloway stopped listening to the conversation happening directly in front of him. A board chairman was explaining a new investment opportunity. A television reporter waited nearby with prepared questions. Several donors stood patiently hoping for a moment of his attention. Under normal circumstances, Ethan could manage all of it effortlessly. Years of public appearances had trained him to divide his focus without anyone noticing. Tonight was different. Something had pulled his attention across the ballroom. At first, he could not identify what it was. Then he saw Olivia. For a brief second, he simply stared. His daughter was laughing, not smiling politely, not posing for photographs, not offering the carefully measured expressions she often used at public events. She was genuinely laughing. The sight hit him with surprising force. He had not realized how long it had been. The reporter continued speaking. Ethan barely heard a word. His eyes remained fixed on the far corner of the room. Olivia's face looked brighter than it had all evening. Her hands moved rapidly as she communicated with the young waitress seated beside her. Ethan watched another burst of laughter cross his daughter's face. Something tightened inside his chest. The chairman paused mid-sentence. "Mr. Calloway?" Ethan blinked. "Sorry." The man smiled politely. "You seem distracted." Ethan looked back toward Olivia again before answering. "Perhaps I am." The chairman followed his gaze. His expression softened immediately. "Your daughter seems happy." Ethan did not answer right away. Happy. The word lingered in his thoughts. He had spent years convincing himself he was providing everything Olivia needed. The best schools, the best doctors, the best opportunities, every resource money could buy. Yet watching her now, he felt an uncomfortable question surface. When was the last time he had seen her laugh like that because of him? He struggled to remember. Across the room, Chloe remained unaware she was being observed. She was too busy trying to keep up with Olivia's increasingly energetic storytelling. The girl had become animated. Her hands flew through the air as she described a disastrous science project involving too much vinegar and an exploding model volcano. Chloe laughed so hard she nearly forgot she was supposed to be working. Olivia grinned proudly. It covered the teacher's shoes. Chloe widened her eyes dramatically. The teacher survived? Barely. Chloe pressed a hand against her chest in mock relief. Thank goodness. Olivia's laughter returned immediately. Nearby guests continued watching with growing curiosity. Several had begun smiling without fully understanding why. Happiness possessed a strange ability to spread. Even when people could not hear the conversation, they could feel its warmth. A woman standing near the auction display quietly wiped at her eyes. Another guest shook his head in amazement. Neither knew the details. They simply recognized something genuine in a room often filled with rehearsed interactions. Chloe noticed the attention at last. She glanced around and immediately looked embarrassed. Olivia followed her gaze. Then she signed something that made Chloe laugh again. They probably think you are losing the argument about kangaroo shoes. Chloe pointed accusingly. Because you refuse to accept the truth. For shoes. Final answer. Olivia shook her head with exaggerated disappointment. Impossible. Their laughter overlapped once more. This time it echoed beyond their small corner. More heads turned. More conversations paused. The ripple spread steadily through the ballroom. Ethan watched all of it. Every smile. Every gesture. Every expression crossing Olivia's face. He noticed something else too. His daughter looked completely relaxed beside Chloe. There was no strain from lip reading. No frustration. No effort. Communication flowed naturally between them. Effortlessly. The realization struck harder than he expected. Because he understood exactly why. Chloe was speaking Olivia's language. Not asking Olivia to adapt. Not expecting her to meet the world halfway. She had stepped fully into Olivia's world instead. Ethan felt a sharp wave of guilt. He knew basic signs. A few greetings. A handful of phrases learned years ago after Olivia's diagnosis. He had always intended to learn more. There had always been another meeting. Another deadline. Another international flight. Another urgent responsibility. Tomorrow became next month. Next month became next year. Suddenly, the excuses sounded far weaker than they once had. Olivia laughed again. Ethan swallowed hard. The soundless joy on her face carried more weight than any speech delivered that evening. Nearby, one of his senior executives approached. The television crew is ready whenever you are. Ethan did not look away from his daughter. Give me a moment. The executive appeared surprised. That rarely happened. Ethan was known for punctuality, precision, control. Yet tonight none of those things felt especially important. For the first time all evening, he found himself wanting to be somewhere else. Not on stage. Not in front of cameras. Not surrounded by influential people. He wanted to understand what had transformed his daughter in less than 20 minutes. He wanted to know who Chloe Bennett was. And most of all, He wanted to know why a complete stranger had succeeded in reaching Olivia's heart so quickly when he had spent years struggling to bridge the same distance himself. The television crew waited near the stage. The auction coordinator checked her watch. Two executives exchanged concerned glances as Ethan remained unusually still. None of them understood what had captured his attention so completely. Ethan barely noticed them. His eyes stayed fixed on Olivia. He remembered another laugh. Years ago, a small beach outside Sydney. Olivia running barefoot through wet sand while her mother chased her along the shoreline. She could not hear the waves crashing against the rocks, but she could feel them beneath her feet. Every photograph from that day showed the same expression: joy, pure and effortless. After his wife died, that expression had become increasingly rare. Ethan told himself it was grief, then school challenges, then adolescence, then life. Watching Olivia now forced him to confront a possibility he had avoided for years. Perhaps some of the distance had not come from tragedy alone. Perhaps some of it had come from him. Across the ballroom, Chloe noticed Olivia studying her face. "What?" Chloe signed. Olivia tilted her head. "You look sad for a second." Chloe laughed softly. "You are very observant." Olivia smiled proudly. "I know." Chloe shook her head in amusement. Then she glanced toward the stage where cameras continued waiting for Ethan. "Does your father enjoy these events?" Olivia followed her gaze. "He says they help people." Chloe nodded. "That sounds like him." Olivia's expression softened. "He really is a good person." Chloe could hear the loyalty in every movement of the girl's hands. The statement carried no hesitation, no resentment, only affection. Yet there was something else beneath it, something quieter. Chloe waited. Eventually Olivia continued signing. "He just does not always know what I need." The sentence landed heavily. Chloe understood because Liam used to say something similar. People often focused on solving practical problems while overlooking emotional ones. They offered resources when presence was what mattered most, advice when listening was needed, solutions when connection was the real answer. Chloe signed. Carefully. Sometimes parents get scared too. Olivia frowned slightly. Scared of what? Chloe thought about her own parents. About doctors and appointments and uncertainty. About the way adults often pretended confidence while carrying invisible fears. Scared of getting things wrong. Olivia considered that for a moment. Then she signed something that made Chloe's heart ache. "I would rather Dad get things wrong with me than be too busy to try." Chloe felt the truth of those words immediately. Nearby, a photographer lowered his camera after capturing another image. Several guests had stopped pretending not to watch. The atmosphere around the ballroom was changing. People were no longer looking because a billionaire's daughter seemed happy. They were looking because something genuine was unfolding in front of them. In a room filled with polished speeches and carefully planned appearances, authenticity stood out. Ethan noticed it too. Every few moments Olivia's face brightened with another smile. Another laugh. Another expression of excitement. He could not remember the last time he had witnessed so much emotion from her during a public event. Usually she remained polite and composed. Tonight, she looked like a child again. The difference shook him. One of his assistants approached quietly. "The interview cannot be delayed much longer." Ethan nodded absently. 5 minutes. The assistant blinked. 5 minutes had already become 15. Yet even she could see something important was happening across the room. She followed his gaze. Her expression softened immediately. "She looks happy." Ethan swallowed. "Yes." The assistant smiled gently. "Very happy." Ethan did not answer, because happiness was only part of what he was seeing. Olivia looked understood, valued, included. Those things mattered even more. Back in the corner of the ballroom, Chloe and Olivia had moved on to another debate. This one involved whether dolphins secretly judged humans for making poor life choices. Olivia argued they absolutely did. Chloe insisted dolphins were too polite. The conversation became increasingly ridiculous until Olivia laughed so hard she nearly fell sideways in her chair. This time the laughter drew attention from nearly everyone nearby. Several guests smiled openly. A few even laughed despite having no idea what had been said. Chloe could not help laughing too. Then something happened that neither of them expected. Olivia looked across the ballroom and suddenly froze. Her smile remained. Her eyes widened. Chloe followed her gaze. Ethan was looking directly at them. Not glancing. Not distracted. Looking. For several seconds father and daughter simply stared at each other across the crowded room. The distance between them remained unchanged. Yet something felt different. Ethan's expression softened in a way Chloe had not seen before. The polished public mask disappeared. In its place stood a father watching his child. Nothing more. Nothing less. Olivia's hands lowered slowly into her lap. The laughter faded from her face, replaced by uncertainty. Chloe immediately noticed the change. "Are you okay?" she signed. Olivia nodded, then hesitated, then nodded again. Chloe sensed there was more. Before she could ask another question, Olivia signed something so quietly that it almost broke her heart. "I think Dad forgot I was here tonight." Chloe looked toward Ethan again. What she saw there told a different story entirely. Because for the first time that evening, Ethan Calloway looked like a man who had just realized the same thing himself. For several seconds, nobody moved. The ballroom remained filled with conversation and music, yet an invisible thread seemed to stretch between father and daughter across the crowded room. Ethan stood surrounded by people, but his attention belonged entirely to Olivia. And Olivia, who had spent most of the evening feeling forgotten, suddenly found herself unable to look away. Chloe remained silent. She sensed that something important was happening. Some moments did not need interruption. They simply needed space. Ethan felt a familiar pressure building behind his ribs. Regret. It arrived quietly at first. Then all at once, he remembered school performances he had attended while answering emails beneath the table. He remembered promising weekend trips that became business flights instead. He remembered telling himself that success required sacrifice. Looking at Olivia now, he wondered how much of that sacrifice had been hers instead of his. The realization was uncomfortable because it was true. Across the room, Olivia lowered her gaze. Chloe immediately noticed. The brightness that had filled the girl's face moments earlier seemed dimmer now. Not gone, just fragile. Chloe sighed gently. "What are you thinking about?" Olivia hesitated. Then she answered honestly. "Mom." The response surprised Chloe. She waited patiently. Olivia glanced toward Ethan again before continuing. "Mom always made sure people talked to me instead of around me." Chloe listened carefully. Olivia's hands moved slower now. "When I was little, she taught everyone signs. Friends, family, teachers, even neighbors." A faint smile appeared. She made learning fun. Chloe could almost picture it. Olivia's expression softened further. "Mom said communication was another way of saying I love you." The sentence settled heavily between them. Chloe swallowed. She understood exactly why those words mattered. Liam used to say something similar. Not in the same way, but close enough. Connection was love. Attention was love. Presence was love. Many people spent years searching for grand gestures while overlooking those simpler truths. Chloe signed carefully. "She sounds wonderful." Olivia nodded immediately. She was. For a moment, neither of them continued. Then Olivia surprised her again. "Dad was different back then." Chloe tilted her head. "Different how?" Olivia looked toward Ethan once more. He laughed more. Chloe followed her gaze. Ethan remained standing among donors and executives, but his expression had changed. The polished confidence was still there, yet beneath it sat something else. Something vulnerable. Olivia signed another sentence. "After Mom died, he worked all the time." Chloe felt her chest tighten. The missing pieces suddenly began fitting together. Ethan had not pulled away because he did not care. He had pulled away because grief often disguised itself as busyness. Some people cried. Some people talked. Others buried themselves inside work because work felt easier than heartbreak. Olivia signed again. "I think he misses her too much." Chloe stared at those words. They carried wisdom far beyond 12 years. Sometimes children understood adults better than adults understood themselves. Across the ballroom, Ethan watched his daughter sign. He could not understand the conversation. That fact bothered him more than ever before. For years he had accepted that interpreters would help. Teachers would help. Specialists would help. Tonight he saw the flaw in that thinking. Every important conversation between him and Olivia passed through someone else first. Every feeling required a bridge. Every emotional moment depended on translation. Yet Chloe and Olivia needed none of that. They moved effortlessly between thoughts and emotions. Watching them felt like standing outside a locked door. Ethan suddenly realized how often Olivia must have felt the same way. The guilt hit harder than before. Nearby, the television reporter approached cautiously. "Mr. Calloway, are you ready?" Ethan looked at her, then looked back toward Olivia. In a few minutes, the reporter followed his gaze. Her expression softened immediately. "Your daughter?" Ethan nodded. "My daughter." The woman smiled. She looks happy. Ethan released a slow breath. Yes, she does. The reporter studied him for a second. That seems important. Ethan almost laughed at the understatement. Important. The word barely captured what he was feeling. Across the room, Olivia suddenly looked embarrassed. Chloe noticed immediately. What happened? Olivia sighed. I probably talked too much. Chloe stared at her in disbelief. Then she signed dramatically. Impossible. Olivia laughed despite herself. Chloe continued. You spent half the evening being ignored. Now it is your turn. Olivia smiled. The confidence slowly returned. Chloe leaned slightly closer. Liam used to talk for hours whenever someone understood sign language. Olivia's eyes brightened. Really? Chloe nodded. He said he had years of conversations saved up. Olivia laughed softly. That makes sense. Chloe smiled. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for one person to slow down long enough to truly hear them. The words landed more deeply than she intended. Olivia's expression shifted. For a brief moment, emotion flickered across her face. Gratitude, relief, maybe even affection. Then she signed something that made Chloe unexpectedly emotional. Thank you for seeing me tonight. Chloe froze. The simplicity of the sentence carried enormous weight. She thought of Liam. She thought of every lonely person who had ever stood at the edge of a room, hoping someone would notice them. She thought of how little it had actually cost her to sit down and start a conversation. Yet somehow that small decision had changed the entire evening. Chloe smiled gently and signed back. Thank you for talking to me. And for the first time in years, Ethan Calloway watched his daughter smile through tears he could not quite explain, while slowly realizing that the most important lesson of the night had not come from a stage, a speech, or a business leader. It had come from a waitress who had simply taken the time to notice a child standing alone. The ballroom lights seemed softer now. Perhaps nothing had actually changed. Perhaps the difference existed only in the people standing beneath them. Olivia sat quietly for a moment after signing those words to Chloe. The laughter had faded into something deeper. Trust. The kind that appeared when someone finally felt safe enough to lower their guard. Chloe understood that feeling. It was rare, precious, easy to lose. She smiled gently and reached for a glass of water from her tray before offering it to Olivia. The girl accepted it gratefully. Around them, conversations gradually resumed. Guests returned to networking. Reporters prepared their cameras. The evening moved forward. Yet a subtle shift remained in the atmosphere. More people seemed aware of Olivia now. Not because of her father's name. Because of her presence. Chloe noticed several guests smiling warmly whenever they passed. One elderly woman even offered a small wave. Olivia smiled back. The simple interaction seemed to surprise her. Chloe signed playfully. Careful. You are becoming popular. Olivia rolled her eyes dramatically. That sounds exhausting. Chloe laughed. Good answer. Olivia took a sip of water before her expression grew thoughtful again. She looked toward her father. Ethan was still watching occasionally from across the room, though he tried not to make it obvious. Olivia noticed every glance. Children always did. They noticed far more than adults realized. Chloe followed her gaze. Do you want to talk about him? Olivia hesitated, then nodded. A little. Chloe waited patiently. Olivia signed slowly. People think having a famous father is amazing. Chloe remained silent. They think everything is easy. Another pause. Sometimes I let them believe that. Chloe understood immediately. Because explaining loneliness to people who envied your life was often impossible. Olivia continued. Everyone knows his name. Everyone wants his attention. Sometimes I do too. The sentence hit Chloe harder than she expected. There was no anger in it. No bitterness. Only honesty. Pure and simple. Chloe thought carefully before responding. Your father loves you very much. Olivia nodded immediately. I know. Then her hand slowed. That is what makes it harder. Chloe felt her chest tighten. Olivia looked down briefly before continuing. If he did not love me, I would understand why he is never around. The words hung between them. Chloe could not immediately answer. Across the ballroom, Ethan happened to glance in their direction again. He could not understand the signs. He could not hear the conversation. Yet something about Olivia's expression made his stomach sink. She looked serious now, vulnerable. The sight unsettled him. For years he had believed providing security was enough. A beautiful home, excellent schools, opportunities, protection. Tonight he was beginning to understand that children measured love differently. Not in dollars, not in achievements, in time, in attention. In moments shared together, Chloe signed carefully. What would you tell him if you knew he would listen? Olivia blinked. The question clearly caught her off guard. She looked toward the ceiling as she thought. Then she smiled sadly. That is easy. Chloe waited. Olivia's hands moved with heartbreaking simplicity. I would tell him I do not need more things. Chloe felt her throat tighten. I need more of him. The sentence landed like a stone dropped into still water. Chloe stared at it for a moment. So simple, so devastatingly honest. Nearby, the string quartet began another gentle melody. The music floated through the ballroom while Olivia sat quietly, looking toward her father. Chloe followed her gaze. Ethan was shaking hands with donors, smiling politely, performing the role everyone expected. Yet from where Chloe sat, he suddenly looked tired. Not physically tired, emotionally tired, like a man carrying something heavy for far too long. Chloe thought of grief, of responsibility, of impossible expectations. Perhaps Ethan had been surviving rather than living. Perhaps Olivia had been doing the same. She signed gently. I think he would want to hear that. Olivia laughed softly. Maybe. Chloe tilted her head. Maybe? Olivia shrugged. Adults are strange. Chloe burst out laughing. Olivia grinned. They asked complicated questions when simple ones would work. Chloe nodded enthusiastically. Very true. They buy expensive presents instead of spending an afternoon at the beach. Chloe laughed harder. Also true. Olivia's confidence returned with every exchange. The sadness eased slightly. Then she signed something unexpected. Do you know what I miss most? Chloe shook her head. Family movie nights. Chloe smiled. Olivia's eyes brightened as she remembered. Mom would make popcorn. Dad would always fall asleep halfway through. Chloe laughed. Olivia continued. Then Mom and I would take photos of him sleeping and show him the next day. Chloe covered her mouth, laughing. Olivia joined her. The memory clearly carried both joy and loss. Yet sharing it seemed to help. Sometimes memories hurt less when spoken aloud. Across the room, Ethan watched his daughter laugh again. This time the sight brought a different emotion. Not regret alone. Curiosity. Hope. He wanted to know what Chloe had done. How she had created space for Olivia to be herself so quickly. More importantly, he wanted to know why he had stopped creating that space himself. The answer frightened him because he suspected he already knew. Success had demanded everything. Then grief demanded the rest. Somewhere along the way, he had mistaken providing for connecting. Tonight, Waitress had quietly exposed the difference. And while Olivia smiled beside Chloe beneath the warm ballroom lights, Ethan Calloway felt the first crack appear in a wall he had spent years building around his heart. The auction portion of the evening began a few minutes later, but Ethan barely noticed. A series of items appeared on stage. Holiday packages, signed memorabilia, luxury experiences. The audience responded enthusiastically. Bidding paddles rose and fell. Applause echoed through the ballroom. Yet Ethan found himself standing near the back of the crowd, distracted by thoughts he could no longer push aside. For years he had measured success through numbers. Revenue growth, market expansion, shareholder confidence. Every achievement created another target, another goal, another mountain waiting to be climbed. The system made sense because it was predictable. Effort produced results. Discipline created outcomes. Family had never followed those rules. Grief certainly did not. After losing his wife, work became both a refuge and a hiding place. Meetings felt easier than mourning. Schedules felt safer than silence. Success provided structure when everything else felt broken. Somewhere along the way, he convinced himself that building a secure future for Olivia was the greatest gift he could offer. Tonight that belief was beginning to unravel. Across the ballroom, Chloe and Olivia remained seated together. The conversation had slowed naturally. Not because they had run out of things to say, because neither felt the need to fill every moment. Comfortable silence had settled between them. Chloe watched guests moving around the room. Olivia observed them too. The difference was that she no longer looked isolated. She looked included. The change was subtle but unmistakable. Chloe signed a simple question. Tired? Olivia smiled. A little. Big events are exhausting. Chloe nodded knowingly. Too many people. Too many conversations. Olivia laughed. Exactly. Then her expression turned thoughtful again. Can I ask you something? Of course. Olivia hesitated before signing. Were you angry when Liam died? The question caught Chloe off guard. For a moment she simply stared. The ballroom seemed quieter suddenly. More distant. She looked down at her hands before answering honestly. Yes. Olivia waited. Chloe appreciated that. Most people rushed to fill silence. Olivia understood its value. Chloe sighed slowly. I was angry at the situation. Angry that someone so kind had to suffer. Angry that life felt unfair. Olivia nodded gently. Then what happened? Chloe released a slow breath. The answer took years to discover. Eventually, I realized being angry did not help me remember him better. Olivia watched carefully. Chloe continued. So I started focusing on the things he gave me instead. Like sign language. Like patience. Like the ability to notice people who feel invisible. Olivia's eyes softened. Chloe smiled sadly. Liam would have loved you, you know. Olivia looked surprised. Really? Chloe laughed softly. Absolutely. You both ask impossible questions. Olivia grinned. That sounds like a compliment. It is. Across the room, Ethan found himself drifting closer without fully intending to. He stopped near a display of donated artwork and pretended to study it. In reality, he was watching his daughter. The distance between them had shortened considerably, close enough now that he could see the expressions on Olivia's face more clearly. He noticed something that made his chest tighten. She looked lighter, as though a weight she normally carried had been temporarily lifted. Ethan tried to remember the last time he had created that feeling for her himself. The answer did not come. Nearby, two guests were discussing the evening. One woman glanced toward Olivia. She seems happier than I have ever seen her. Her companion nodded. That young waitress has a gift. Ethan looked away immediately, uncomfortable with how accurate the statement felt. A gift? Perhaps. Or perhaps Chloe had simply done something everyone else overlooked. She had paid attention. The thought stayed with him. Back at the table, Olivia was studying the crowd again. This time her expression carried curiosity rather than loneliness. Chloe noticed the difference. What are you thinking about now? Olivia smiled. I am wondering how many people here are lonely. Chloe blinked. That was not the answer she expected. Olivia looked around the ballroom. There are hundreds of people, but some of them still look sad. Chloe followed her gaze. The observation was surprisingly perceptive. She spotted a businessman standing alone near the entrance despite being surrounded by colleagues. A woman smiling politely while staring into space. A man scrolling through his phone rather than speaking to anyone nearby. Olivia might have been right. Chloe signed thoughtfully. More than we realize. Olivia nodded. Liam used to say something similar? Chloe laughed softly. Almost exactly. Olivia smiled with quiet satisfaction. For the first time that evening, Chloe felt something unexpected. Hope. Not the dramatic kind found in films or speeches. The quieter kind. The kind that appeared when two strangers helped each other heal without even realizing it. Olivia had needed someone to see her. Chloe had needed a reminder of why Liam's lessons still mattered. Somehow both had received what they needed. Across the room, Ethan watched the exchange and felt a growing certainty. Tonight could not end with a simple thank you. Something important had happened. Not just to Olivia. To him. For the first time in years, he was questioning choices he had stopped examining long ago. And as the lights of the ballroom reflected across crystal glass and polished marble, Ethan Calloway realized that the most valuable thing he had gained that evening was not connected to business, influence, or success. It was the uncomfortable but necessary understanding that love required more than provision. It required presence. And presence was something he intended to learn again before it was too late. The auction concluded with generous applause. Guests began drifting toward the final portion of the evening, gathering around small tables and lingering near the ballroom exits. The formal schedule was ending, but for Ethan, the most important part of the night had not even begun. He stood quietly for a moment, watching Olivia and Chloe from across the room. The distance between them no longer felt measured in meters. It felt measured in choices. Choices he had made over years without fully understanding their cost. Nearby, his assistant approached once more. The car is ready whenever you are. Ethan glanced toward the exit, then back toward his daughter. Thank you. The assistant waited. Ethan did not move. Finally, she smiled knowingly and stepped away. Across the ballroom, Chloe checked the time. Her shift would end soon. Several staff members had already begun clearing and used glasses and folding service stations. She felt a small pang of disappointment. The evening had passed far more quickly than expected. Olivia noticed the change in her expression immediately. You have to leave soon, do not you? Chloe smiled apologetically. Eventually. Olivia looked down for a moment. The reaction was subtle, but Chloe saw it. She remembered Liam making the same face whenever a good conversation ended. Chloe signed gently. Hey, we still have a few minutes. Olivia nodded. Then she surprised Chloe again. Thank you for making tonight different. Chloe felt emotion rise unexpectedly in her chest. She laughed softly. You made it different too. Olivia tilted her head. How? Chloe thought about it. Because you reminded me why Liam loved teaching people his world. Olivia's expression softened immediately. For a second, neither signed anything. Then a familiar shadow appeared beside them. Chloe sensed someone approaching and turned. Ethan Calloway stood only a few steps away. Up close, he looked different from the man she had seen surrounded by cameras and executives. Less polished somehow. More human. For the first time all evening, uncertainty flickered behind his confident expression. Olivia's eyes widened. Chloe instinctively stood. Mr. Calloway. Ethan shook his head gently. Please. Ethan. Chloe nodded awkwardly. For a brief moment nobody spoke. Ethan looked at his daughter first. Then at Chloe. His gaze lingered there as though he were trying to find the right words. Surprisingly, it seemed difficult for him. Finally he exhaled. I owe you a thank you. Chloe blinked. You do not owe me anything. Ethan glanced toward Olivia. A small smile appeared. I think I do. Olivia watched both of them carefully. Ethan continued. I have attended hundreds of events. Charity dinners. Fundraisers. Conferences. I cannot remember the last time I saw her enjoy one. Chloe followed his gaze toward Olivia. The girl looked suddenly embarrassed. Ethan smiled at his daughter with a tenderness that had been hidden all evening. Especially not like this. Olivia lowered her eyes, but a smile escaped anyway. Chloe felt strangely relieved seeing them look at one another. Ethan turned back toward her. You gave her something tonight that I did not realize she was missing. Chloe shook her head immediately. No, she already had it. Ethan frowned slightly. Chloe smiled. She just needed someone to share it with. The answer seemed to affect him more than she expected. For a moment he looked away, as though considering something difficult. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. That might be the most important thing anyone has said to me in a long time. Olivia looked between them. Chloe could sense the conversation shifting somewhere deeper. Ethan crouched slightly, so he was closer to his daughter's eye level. The movement appeared natural, but Chloe noticed Olivia's surprise. Perhaps it had been a while since he had done something so simple. Ethan looked directly at her. Not past her. Not around her. At her. Then, slowly and somewhat awkwardly, he lifted his hands. The signs were not perfect. The movements lacked confidence. But Olivia recognized them instantly. I am sorry. The world seemed to stop for a second. Olivia stared. Chloe stared too. Ethan continued carefully. I should have learned more. Emotion flashed across Olivia's face. Shock. Hope. Disbelief. Ethan swallowed and signed another sentence. I am trying. The signs were imperfect. The message was not. Olivia's eyes filled with tears. Not tears of sadness. Something gentler. Something brighter. For several seconds, she simply looked at her father. Then she smiled. A real smile. The kind Chloe had come to recognize immediately. Olivia raised her hands. I know. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Relief washed across his face so visibly that Chloe almost looked away. Some wounds did not heal in a single moment. Some distances took years to cross. Yet standing there beneath the warm ballroom lights, father and daughter had taken a step toward each other. And sometimes one step was enough to change the direction of an entire journey. Neither Chloe nor Olivia spoke for several moments. The emotion lingering between father and daughter felt too important to interrupt. Around them, the gala was slowly winding down. Guests collected coats. Staff cleared tables. The string quartet played its final pieces beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. Yet in that small corner of the ballroom, it felt as though an entirely different evening had begun. Ethan remained crouched beside Olivia. The awkwardness that had always seemed to surround their public interactions had softened. Not disappeared, just softened enough for something genuine to emerge. Olivia looked at him carefully, as if trying to decide whether this moment was real. Then she signed something that surprised both adults. Do you remember the aquarium? Ethan blinked. Of all the memories she could have chosen, he had not expected that one. Slowly he nodded. Of course. Olivia smiled faintly and signed again. You spent 3 hours teaching me the names of every fish. Ethan laughed quietly. The memory returned instantly. Olivia had been 6 years old. She had insisted on stopping at every single exhibit. They had stayed so long that the staff politely reminded them the building was closing. Ethan remembered carrying her to the car afterward because she had fallen asleep against his shoulder. The recollection hit him harder than expected. Olivia signed another sentence. "That was my favorite day." Ethan swallowed. His throat suddenly felt tight. "Mine too," he admitted softly. Olivia stared at him. The answer clearly surprised her. Chloe watched the exchange with quiet gratitude. Sometimes people assumed healing arrived through dramatic speeches. More often it arrived through remembered moments. Shared memories. Small truths spoken aloud. Ethan looked at his daughter. "I should have given you more days like that." Olivia studied him for a second. Then she signed carefully. "We can still have more." The simplicity of the response nearly broke something inside him. No accusation. No resentment. Just an open door. A second chance. Ethan lowered his gaze briefly before looking back at her. "I would like that." Nearby, several staff members began stacking chairs. Chloe realized her shift had officially ended. Normally, she would have hurried home. Tonight, she found herself reluctant to leave. Not because of the glamorous venue or the famous guests. Because she could see something important happening in front of her. Something rare. Ethan turned toward Chloe. "I hope you know what you have done tonight." Chloe immediately shook her head. "I sat down and had a conversation." Ethan smiled. "You did much more than that." Chloe looked uncomfortable with the praise. She always had. Ethan continued anyway. "You reminded me of something I should never have forgotten." Chloe hesitated. "What is that?" Ethan glanced at Olivia before answering. "That the people we love need our time more than they need our success." The words settled quietly between them. Olivia looked at her father with an expression Chloe would never forget. Hope. Not cautious hope. Real hope. The kind that appears when actions finally begin matching promises. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and removed a business card. He held it toward Chloe. She immediately looked alarmed. "You do not have to do that." Ethan laughed softly. "This is not what you think." Chloe accepted the card reluctantly. "Then what is it?" Ethan looked genuinely sincere. "A way to stay in contact." Chloe frowned in confusion. Ethan continued. "I know I have a great deal to learn, especially if I intend to communicate with my daughter the way she deserves." Olivia's eyes widened slightly. Ethan smiled at her. "And I suspect you are much better at teaching than you realize." Chloe glanced between them. Understanding slowly dawned. "You want help learning sign language?" Ethan nodded. "I do." Olivia looked happier with every passing second. Chloe laughed softly. "I am not exactly a professional teacher." Ethan smiled. "Perhaps not. But you reached Olivia in 20 minutes more effectively than anyone has in years." Chloe looked embarrassed. "That is not fair." Ethan shook his head. "Maybe not. But it is true." Olivia suddenly signed something that made both adults laugh. "She is being modest." Chloe pointed at her in mock betrayal. Olivia grinned unapologetically. The tension dissolved immediately. For the first time that evening, all three of them were laughing together. The moment felt surprisingly natural, as if some invisible wall had finally come down. The final guests began leaving. Ballroom doors opened and closed. The evening was ending. Yet Chloe could not shake the feeling that tonight would remain with all of them for a very long time. Ethan stood and offered his hand to Olivia. Instead of taking it immediately, she looked at him expectantly. Ethan hesitated, then slowly raised his hands and signed another message. The movements remained imperfect, clumsy, careful, but they were unmistakable. "Ready to go home together?" Olivia stared for a second before her entire face lit up. She nodded enthusiastically. Then she slipped her hand into his. Chloe felt tears prick unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes. Not because everything was fixed. It was not. Healing rarely happened in a single evening. But because both of them were finally choosing the same direction. And sometimes that was enough. As father and daughter turned toward the ballroom exit side by side, Ethan glanced back one final time. "Thank you, Chloe." She smiled warmly. "Take her to the aquarium again." Ethan laughed. Olivia immediately signed yes with exaggerated enthusiasm. The three of them shared one last smile beneath the fading lights of the ballroom. And for the first time in years, the future no longer felt quite so far away. 3 months later, the first warm Saturday of spring arrived with clear blue skies stretching across Sydney Harbor. Sunlight danced across the water. Families wandered along the foreshore. Children chased seagulls near the ferry terminal while tourists paused to take photographs. It was the kind of day that felt almost too beautiful to waste indoors. Chloe smiled as she stepped through the entrance of the aquarium and checked her phone. A message had arrived 15 minutes earlier. "We are already inside. Olivia says you are late." Chloe laughed softly. She typed a quick reply. "Tell Olivia I am exactly 3 minutes early." The response came back almost immediately. "Olivia says that still counts as late." Chloe shook her head in amusement and slipped the phone into her bag. Some things, apparently, never changed. She followed the signs toward the main exhibit hall and immediately spotted them. Ethan and Olivia stood beside a massive viewing window filled with gliding stingrays and colorful reef fish. The sight stopped Chloe for a moment. Not because they were there, because of how different they looked together. 3 months earlier, a careful distance had existed between them. It was subtle but unmistakable. Now that distance was gone. Ethan stood beside his daughter rather than several steps away. They were laughing about something. More importantly, they were communicating. Not through an interpreter, not through a phone, through sign language. Ethan's movements remained imperfect, occasionally clumsy, sometimes slower than Olivia's. But he was doing it. Every day since the gala, he had committed himself to learning. At first it had been 1 lesson each evening, then 2, then entire weekends spent practicing. Olivia corrected him relentlessly. Ethan accepted every correction with surprising patience. Somewhere along the way, learning a language had become something deeper. It became a way home. Olivia spotted Chloe first. Her face lit up instantly. "Chloe." Ethan turned around. A smile appeared immediately. "You made it." Chloe laughed. "Apparently I am late." Olivia signed dramatically. "Very late." Ethan translated. "She says you are very late." Chloe pointed at both of them. "Conspiracy." Olivia laughed. The soundless joy on her face looked just as bright as it had the night they first met. Maybe brighter. They spent the next several hours wandering through exhibits together. Sharks drifted silently overhead. Schools of silver fish moved like living clouds. Children pressed excitedly against glass tunnels, while parents pointed out sea turtles and giant rays. At one point, Olivia stopped in front of a display featuring colorful coral reefs. She turned toward Chloe unexpectedly. "Remember what you said that night?" Chloe tilted her head. "Which part?" Olivia smiled. "About people feeling invisible." Chloe nodded slowly. Olivia looked thoughtful. Then she signed something carefully. "I do not feel invisible anymore." The words hit Chloe harder than she expected. She glanced toward Ethan. He had seen the exchange. His eyes softened immediately. Olivia continued. "Dad talks with me every day now." Ethan laughed quietly. "That is because she gives homework." Olivia grinned. "True." Chloe laughed too. The warmth between them felt effortless. Natural. Earned. Later, they stopped at a small cafe overlooking the harbor. Olivia disappeared briefly to buy drinks. Ethan watched her go. Then he turned toward Chloe. For a moment, neither spoke. The sounds of the waterfront drifted around them. Boats moved across sparkling water. Seagulls called overhead. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "I owe you more than a thank you." Chloe immediately shook her head. "No." Ethan smiled. "Yes." Chloe opened her mouth to argue. Ethan raised a hand gently. "Not because you fixed anything." She paused. Ethan looked out toward the harbor before continuing. "Because you reminded me that there was something worth fixing." The honesty in his voice made Chloe look away briefly. Ethan laughed softly. "Do you know what Olivia told me last week?" Chloe shook her head. Ethan smiled. "She said learning sign language is the first project I have ever worked on that matters more than money." Chloe burst out laughing. "That sounds exactly like her." Ethan nodded. "It does." They sat quietly for a moment. Then Ethan added something else. She was right. Across the cafe, Olivia returned carrying 3 drinks and looking very pleased with herself. She set them down dramatically before signing a question to her father. "Did you tell her?" Ethan smiled. "Tell her what?" Olivia rolled her eyes. Then she signed directly to Chloe. He finally fell asleep during a movie again. Chloe laughed so hard she nearly spilled her drink. Ethan groaned. Olivia looked delighted. For the first time in years, the memory no longer belonged only to the past. New memories were replacing the old ones. Better ones. Shared ones. As the afternoon sun began sinking toward the horizon, they walked together toward the harbor edge. Golden light reflected across the water. Everything seemed calmer. Softer. Olivia stopped suddenly and looked out at the view. Then she turned toward her father. Ethan looked down. Olivia raised her hands. The movement was simple, familiar, beautiful. I love you, Dad. Ethan stared at her for only a second before answering in the same language. The signs were no longer hesitant, no longer uncertain. I love you too. Olivia smiled through shining eyes and slipped her hand into his. Chloe looked away toward the harbor, giving them the privacy of the moment. Behind her, she heard their laughter carried gently by the wind. Ethan had spent years building an empire that reached across continents. Yet the most important bridge he ever built measured only the distance between himself and his daughter. And all because one evening, in a crowded room full of important people, a waitress noticed a child standing alone and chose to say hello. Sometimes a life changes because one person looks at another and silently says, I see you. For Olivia, Chloe, and Ethan, that was the moment the world finally felt less lonely.